As usual, I take the liberty for a few minutes of drush on the chashivos of the opportunity that Rabbi Shem gives each one of us to be able to sit and learn in our own homes or offices in front of computer screens. Yaakov Avinu is described Ish Tom Yoshev Oholim. Pashtus, you sit in the Beis Medrash, it's a Yoshev Oil. You sit in one Beis Medrash. What's the Oholim? So Rashi already seems to have had the problem, and Rashi said, Olosh Hashem va'olosh Aleva. He had two yeshivas where he learned. The Mashkiach Rabbi Yerucham, in various places in Das Torah, discusses this question. But in Das Chochma Musa, he says a chiddush. Yoshev Oholim, he wants to learn Kafi Pshutoi, not like Chazal, Olosh Hashem va'olosh Aleva. Yoshev Oholim means that the time you spend in yeshiva is all well and good. The time you're in Koilin and Beis Medrash is all well and good. But the tachlis of our learning is that wherever we find ourselves has to become an Ohalo Shel Torah. Yaakov Avinu, by virtue of being an Ish Tom, he became a Yoshev Oholim. Wherever his oil was, he was in his business, he was in his home, he was on vacation, he was here, he was there. But he was a Yoshev Oholim until the advent of computer and Zoom. If you were Yoshev Oholim in every place, you had to learn by yourself. Now we have a new concept that the fellow can be in any little room in the world, and he's a Yoshev Oholim. Zusammen mit the Chabura of Chashmel B'nai Torah, who are learning together, Yoshev Oholim. Pasuk says in Keheles, Mokim Sheyipol Ha'etz Shom Yehu. Shlomo Melech says beforehand that the seed can fall Batzofen and it can fall Badorim. Mokim Sheyipol Ha'etz Shom Yehu. Wherever that seed will fall, Shom Yehu, in that place, it will take root and it will give forth pairs. And the Mepharshim say this is talking about the Heilige Torah. Of course, there's places which are ideal for Torah. There's more fertile ground, a better compost, and better protection. There are ideal places for learning Torah. If you're to sit and learn a Beis Medrash packed with Bochram and Yingalait, to be mefalpel in the Beis Medrash with Choshev people, that's the best. But Shlomo HaMelech says we're not limited to that. The seed might fall in Tzofan and it might fall in Dorim. Mokim sheyipol ha'etz shom yehu. Wherever the eitz will fall, that is the place where Kadosh Baruch Hu wants it to be, and he wants us to create from that a Yoshev Oholim. Now, Shlomo Melech says further in Keheles, HaChochma to'oz ba'aleho. The Chochma, the Limud HaTorah, helps a person Yoisa me'asara shalitim, more than the 10 shalitim. Who are the 10 shalitim who help a person? So Rashi says there, asara shalitim is a person's eyes and ears and nose, all the different abilities and functions that the human body has, which enable us to be involved in this world. But the Torah, the Ein HaSeichel, does more for us than our 2 natural eyes and all of our other physical abilities. HaChochma, the Torah that we learn, to'oz ba'aleho, helps us more than the asara shalitim of the rest of the body. In the Zohar Kodesh, it says asara shalitim are the 10 fingers of the person. Everything that we do in this world, we do with our 10 fingers. And we imagine that with 10 fingers, we bring in our parnasa, and we imagine with the 10 fingers, we build houses, and we imagine with our 10 fingers, we get involved in everything happening in this world. But the Chochma to'oz ba'aleho yoisa me'asara shalitim, more than all the other things that we do with our bodies, the Heilige Torah. On the Limud HaTorah we say every morning, Elu dvorim she'adam oichel perisayim ba'olam hazeh v'akeren kayemes la'olam habo. There's a big schar in olam habo, but there's a perisayim ba'olam hazeh for many mitzvahs and particularly for Limud HaTorah. This schar of perisayim ba'olam hazeh manifests itself in many different ways. In the simplest way, you learn Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides you with parnasa. You'll have food to put on the table. The Mashgiach of Chevron, Rebbe Chasman, in his Oil, says his famous mashal of the king came to the shtetl and he saw a beggar, a pauper, and for some reason or another he was mitzachein be'enov, and he invites him, you should come on the royal train. Us English know what it means, the royal train. He offers him a seat in the royal train, you come with me to my palace in the capital city. Sure. The Oni boards the royal train on his allotted seat, and an hour goes by and there's no food. And what's it saying? We're going to travel for a day or two or three, and there's no food. What's going to be? And he musters up the courage and he walks through the train, through all the ministers and people who help the king, until he comes all the way to the king's carriage, and he knocks on the door, and it must be something extremely important. And the door is open and he's ushered in. And what do you want? What brings you here? And he says, Your Highness, I appreciate your generosity, but where's the food? And of course, the whole carriage bursts out into laughter. You really think that on the royal carriage you're going to go hungry? It goes without saying that if you're a member in the royal carriage, and as they laugh, there's an announcement made that everyone who's interested should know when the meal is going to be served, and if there's anything else you wish, it'll be brought to you. Says Rebbe Chasman, you're zeicha to learn Torah, you're on the royal train. If you're on the royal train, they didn't forget to make sure that the people on the royal train don't go hungry. You learn Torah, that's not the schar. The schar is waiting at him haba. But the Rebbeinu Shem takes care of your parnasa. More than that, the Mefarshim say, what are the real Peirasei ba'olam hazeh? Eile Toldos Noach, Shem v'chom v'yofes, says Rashi, Toldoseim shel tzadikim, can be in different ways. They can be ma'asim tovim. The true Peirasei are our children, our precious children. The Rebbeinu Shem benches us with children. Nachas from children is the really elusive factor in this world, which nobody knows any way of guaranteeing nachas from children. But the Mefarshim say this is one of the Berushim. You learn another black Gemara, you get involved in another Shia. The sweetness of having children following in the Derech HaTorah is a chelik of the Peirasei ba'olam hazeh. Every svara that we learn, whether we agree or we disagree, but as we go through and we suggest things and we discuss things, every svara is part of the Torah. And even a svara which you're doicha, and even a svara which you bring a raya against it, but it makes the Torah better. The Shmaitzer in his Akdomas is a beautiful thing. He brings down a pasuk in Keheles with a pirush of Yedei Moshe, Moshe al-Mosnino. Moshe al-Mosnino has a first pshat in the pasuk and then a second pshat. The Shmaitzer only brings a second pshat. Zevuvei Moves, Yavish, flies, if they die, they give off a bad odor. But Shemen Rekeach, if you put these flies into a Shemen Rekeach, a sweet-smelling shemen, which has a terrifically good smell, perfume, there can be ingredients in the perfume which intrinsically these ingredients give off a bad smell, but they react together with the components of the wonderful perfume, and they actually help and give a better smell. As we know from the Chalbana and the Ketayra, it's the same thing. Chalbana in its own right has a bad smell. You combine it with all the Samamona Ketayras, and the Chalbana itself becomes part of the good smell. Says Rav Moshe al-Moshnino, so too is with Limud HaTorah. There can be a svara, which is wrong. There can be a svara to bring a raya against it. But if it's part of the Torah, and you go through that stage until you come to the emes, that's part of the good reach of the Torah. Every svara, sometimes in yeshiva, Talmud asks something which is completely wrong, but nevertheless, when it's part of a shir, when it's part of the chippus ha'emes, then it becomes a part of the Shem and Rekeach, part of the beauty and the geschmack of Limud Torah. My Rabbi say, let's get down to work, to have the zchus to learn together the inyonim of Hano from manufacture of electricity on Shabbos. Now, I understood in the minute that I came on that Yedideinu Reb Shloima gave a good part of his shir for the discussion of whether the usage of chashmal on Shabbos, which malacha d'oraisa are we talking about? Is this makapatish? Is it mavir? Is it perhaps boina? And then the chiddush of Reb Chaim Greineman b'shem the Chazon Ish, even making the circuit itself is in itself a ma'aseh of boina, even if there's no electricity running through it. It's a big shmooze. As Be'ez Hashem, halavai, we should have the opportunity to discuss this together at some stage. I like to follow instructions, and I was told that we want to learn together in Yonim of Maisa Shabbos, having a no from malachas which we've done on Shabbos. This is a completely different discussion vis-a-vis electricity, because we're not talking about which malacha there is when I connect to the electricity. We're discussing which malachas are done by those who create the electricity, those who manufacture electricity. And of course, different generators and different generating plants work in different ways. But tzad hashava shebehem is that basically, however you're going to make electricity, manufacturing electricity involves doing malachas which are forbidden on Shabbos. Whether it's the simplest, that you take a tractor and you fill up with coal and you throw the coal into the furnace, and the furnace then burns it and creates whatever it creates, which then drives the turbine, or any other way of manually creating electricity rather than hydroelectricity, but the ways that are made in the regular plant for the manufacture of electricity involves doing malachas d'oraisa. And now our question is, are we allowed to derive benefit on Shabbos or after Shabbos from these malachas which are done on Shabbos? Now, to be fair, this question is not really limited to Eretz Yisrael. In the poskim of 100 years ago, the Marsham, the Marshag, the Machne Chaim, the Gedolei Olam, who lived still in Europe, discussed when electricity became available. In those days, it was manufactured by Goyim, like it is in the rest of the world today. Goyim make electricity. And they already discussed then, are you allowed to use that electricity on Shabbos, which is something which all of us are brought up with. Of course, we use electricity on Shabbos. What's wrong? I didn't press any buttons. I didn't turn on the light. But my lights work on Shabbos, and everything else in my house works on electricity. And in the poskim, this was not so simple. Why? The goy is doing his malacha. So it says in Shulchan Aruch and Simrei Sheinfeld that there's a merchatz, and the merchatz is available for public bathhouse for all the people in town. And there's goyim stoking the fires on Shabbos. So there it says at the din that we know that if a goy did for a Jew on Shabbos, you're not allowed to have an offer from it. We're scared you're going to come and ask the goy to do the malacha on Shabbos. What happens if the goy stoked the fire in the public bathhouse? So it says there in the Shulchan Aruch, it depends. What are most people in town? Most users of the bathhouse are goyim. They did it for the goyim. Most of them are Yidden. They did it for the Yidden. And accordingly, lich'oira, the dinim of electricity manufactured around the world should be the same. If roiv people live in town, roiv people who are using the supply from this generating plant, if roiv people are going, then they made it for them, and it's mutter. Roiv people are Yidden, then it'll be forbidden. However, it's not so simple when it comes to electricity. The Marsham, the Minchas Yitzchak, the Revushei Mordcha, all come with a Chiddush. And they say that in the Shulchan Aruch, the guy stoked the fire for a public bathhouse. And it's a service provided by the city council, the municipality, that there's a bathhouse on Shabbos. Electrics today, we pay for it. And Gedolei HaPoskim say that when each individual pays for the electricity that he uses, then the goy does it on behalf of every paying person. When did the Shulchan Aruch say that it depends on Roiv? If he just made it for Roiv, but if each person who is using the service pays for it, then he made it for each person as part of the people who he made it for. He made it not just for 5 million goyim, he made it for 5 million goyim and for the Yidden who pay. If he made it for Yidden and goyim, then it's clear that it's also to have an offer from it. He made it for the Yidden as well. They're paying members. Others say that because we're paying members, there becomes an issue of schirus poyalim. There's another nidden here. The Bir Halacha says that he doesn't discuss about payment, but the Bir Halacha says that if the goy not only just stoked his merchats, but the goy stoked the merchats, and he said explicitly, I'm doing it for the Jew as well. Then there's no heter by the fact that Roiv people are going. A number of poskim hold that when it's Dovi Yodua Mufursim, that the Yidden are also beneficiaries of the electrics in town, that's called as if the goy says Mufurish, he's doing it for them. You have to understand halacha, what's the difference between the goy who just did for the Roiv said Mufurish. What is actually the difference in halacha? But these are the nidoyin in the poskim. On the other hand, we have Rav Moshe, in Igros Moshe. Rav Moshe is a great chiddush. That there's a difference between a merchat and electricity. Rav Moshe writes that although by the merchats, if Roiv people in the town are Jews, you're not allowed to have an off from what the goy did in stoking the fire in the merchats. But if Roiv people in town are Yidden and the goy operated the generator and created electricity, that electricity b'mutter ba'anos, says Rav Moshe. Only if he made it specifically for Yidden, then it'll be also. But if it's a shutus of Yidden and goyim, Rav Moshe holds that this is mutter even by Roiv Yisrael. So there's a number of nidoinim in the poskim about electrics in the Welt, which is made by goyim. Halacha l'maisa, we all know that haskomas poskim is that we're allowed to use electricity made by goyim on Shabbos, and this is accepted halacha. The discussion is in Eretz Yisrael. Now, nothing really to do with Eretz Yisrael, just happens to be this way in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael has got one thing, that it's true that most people using electricity are Yidden. And therefore, even if we would have goyim generating electricity here, we would have what to talk about. But far greater issue is that to our terrific embarrassment, the malachas are being done by Yidden. There are Yidden on Shabbos. Sadly, it's impossible to really appreciate the discussion of the usage of electricity in Eretz Yisrael without paying a visit during the week to a generating plant, which is available here in Eretz Yisrael. You can go to Chadera and you can watch them. They take you there and show you how you actually see them doing their malachas on Shabbos, whether it's at the computer and whether it's at the turbine. There's endless malachas being done, and being done by Yidden, and being done on Shabbos. A malacha done by a Yid on Shabbos is more severe than a malacha done by a goy. Malacha done by a goy, the Chachamim forbade, because we're worried that you come to ask the goy. It's a shmira for the issa of Amir L'Akum. In order not to be initial and Amir L'Akum, so Chazal said there's an issa of Hanor from what the goy did on Shabbos. what the Yid did on Shabbos is Maisa Shabbos. There's a separate Issa in having a no from a Malacha done on Shabbos by a Yid. This is the major discussion. It's not possible for us to discuss in an hour all the different opinions and all the different svaras. In a general sense, talking about the minig, that the Chazon Ish was extremely strict about using electricity on Shabbos here in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore instituted either batteries or generators, whatever it might be. There's a letter of HaRav Hutner in Pachat Yitzchak where he writes to somebody who's considering moving there to Israel, and he writes to him, if you're moving to Bnei Brak, chas v'sholem, you're not allowed to use electricity. There's nothing to talk about in Bnei Brak, but however much we're going to discuss isn't going to change the fact that the Chazon Ish forbade it. Outside of Bnei Brak, the Hasidic world generally is makel about electricity on Shabbos, and the Litvish world outside of the Chotz of the Chazon Ish is split into two, and we would like to discuss things from a halachic standpoint as much as we are able to right away. Before we get involved, we have to say that a little bit of history. The Chazon Ish in his Sefer doesn't discuss Maisa Shabbos in deriving benefit from electricity in Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos. Interesting. I always heard as a bocha, even before I came to Eretz Yisrael, the Chazon Ish forbids Maisa Shabbos, all the malachas that they're doing. If you see in Sefer, the Chazon Ish doesn't say that. Chazon Ish says, Chil Hashem. It's a Chil Hashem that I'm sitting and enjoying my Shabbos at the expense of Chil Shabbos Mamash. There's this Yid in Tel Aviv or Chadera or wherever he might be, Nebuch, who's insulting the Rebbeinu Shloim, and I'm deriving an awe from it on Shabbos. To have an awe from a Chil Shabbos, it's a Chil Hashem. That's what he writes in Sefer. The first time I saw this in Sefer, I deduced from the Chazon Ish that Kinira, that the Chazon Ish himself didn't hold this Issa of Maisa Shabbos. Chazon Ish didn't write Maisa Shabbos. He found some Issa somewhere unclear exactly where it comes from. The Chazon Ish made an Issa of Chil Shabbos. No, of Chil Hashem. No, nicht gefährlich. Kinira, two things. It's only Chil Hashem, and there's no problem with Maisa Shabbos. That's why I was Medai. Until I grew up a little bit, and I saw that I wasn't the business opinion of the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish held that Avad is an Issa of Maisa Shabbos, but he held that the Issa of Chil Hashem is far stricter, which led the Chazon Ish to be'emes and be much stricter than the dinim of Maisa Shabbos, because he held it was a Chil Hashem. So much so that there are those who even hold that even b'mokim choila, and if you're worse than a choila, even so the Chazon Ish won't allow it, because even if Maisa Shabbos, you can be mate, or Chil Hashem you can't be mate, even b'mokim choili, and those who even suggested even b'mokim choili shesh b'sakon, it's still a Chil Hashem until they were mate, and they said no, but in this situation, not a Chil Hashem. This was the opinion of the Chazon Ish. It's a Maisa Shabbos plus Chil Hashem. Adova Yodua, that Reb Nosson Kuperstock was from the Milchama in Yerushalayim, and he wrote a sefer called Meir's Nosson. Meir's Nosson, his name was Reb Nosson, and Meir's Nosson, all about using electricity on Shabbos. He learned by the Tzvi. He wrote a sefer Meir's Nosson, in which he showed and demonstrated that he held that there's an issa of having a no from electricity generated by malachas of Eden on Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael. He brought the sefer to his Rebbe, the Tzvi, for Askar. Tzvi took it home and learned through it, and was very impressed. And we'll still see Mitzvah Hashem. What was the chiddush that the Tzvi learned when he learned this sefer? Tzvi, you call it Terakula anyway. And the Tzvi sent instructions to buy for himself batteries in order to change his own house from the generating system to batteries, And he wrote Haskama for the Sefer. He gave the Haskama to Rav Nosson Kupperstock. He said, this is the most expensive Haskama I wrote in my life, because this Haskama demanded of me to buy batteries for my own home. Now, at the same time that he wrote this Haskama, at the same time that he lived in Yerushalayim, the Heilige Belzer Ruf, the Reine Levroch. Now, Baron Belzer, Kadosh Elyon Malach Elikim. And it's well known that very often when people would come, would ask questions to the Belzerov, and when there was something of halachic nature, he would send the Shaila to Chabina Rov. He held Chabina Rov to be the last word in halacha. The Chabina Rov sent his son-in-law, Rabbi Shimon Shneizim, to the Belzerov to say, you should know that I've written Haskama for this Sefer. I now don't allow usage of electricity on Shabbos. If you, Belzerov, want to say that it's mutter, by all means, big enough, Belzerov can have his own opinion. But I'm being my dear you that if until now the reason why you were Mekel, because you were relying on me, you should know that I've changed my mind and I'm not Mekel anymore. And from then on, the Shabina Rov was Machmir, but Belzerov didn't change. And the stories of people who came to the Belzerov and asked, why is it mutter? And the Belzerov said, when you grow up, you'll understand. He didn't explain himself. Maybe if we have the opportunity, we'll try to explain what I might think what is the pshat in Belzerov's Heta. There are those in the Chassidic world who admit that the Shabina Rov was machmir after he wrote the Haskama, but they say that was only else covered to Rav Nosson Kupperstock, since he wanted his Talmud to be Matzliach and he wrote a Haskama, so out of respect, he had to change and not use electricity. Which is hard to know whether you can say that, because if that was true, then why did he need to send a message to the Belzerov to say that he's changed his mind? And there's those who say that although the Shabina Rov changed his mind and did use Chashmal, and used the battery, but he always left one little light on Shabbos out of respect to the opinion of the Belzerov until the Rabban Belzer was nifta, and from then on he didn't use any electricity. It's very, very unclear exactly what happened at that kufa. Al Kaponim, what's negate to us is to try to understand the inyonim al pi halacha. So, the first and perhaps most famous suggestion to allow the use of the hanor from the melachos that are done when they generate electricity on Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael. The simplest one is the one suggested in Igros Moshe. We're talking about a country with, HaRav, millions of people, and many of them are in life-threatening situations, and their situations are only taken care of by electricity. There's people in hospitals who need machines. There's people in their own homes who survive on electricity. So this Nebuch Machal Shabbos comes to work on Shabbos and he's throwing coal into the turbine. So unfortunately, he might be Machal Shabbos, but what's he doing? What he's doing is necessary for Pikuach Nefesh, because if he didn't do this, then these Yidden would die. That would be the simplest way to allow it. Now, it's true that he didn't think of this, but Maisi is doing this for the Tzarech of Pikuach Nefesh. Reb Moshe and Igros Moshe doesn't allow this. He says, Meir Kechiddush. It's true, he says, when this Yid comes to work on Shabbos, there's no other arrangement in place for these Cholim Sheyesh B'hem Sakana. And it's true that if he came to ask me at 9 o'clock on Shabbos morning, should I do it? I would tell him, yes, do it. But, says Reb Moshe, it's incorrect to run the place this way. How should we really do it? We should generate extra electricity during the week so as to avoid having to do it on Shabbos. We should train Goyim that Goyim should do it for us on Shabbos. And we're not allowed to allow a situation to develop in which we need a Yid to be Mechal Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh. And Reb Moshe says a Chiddush. In this case, there will be an Issa of Maisa Shabbos to derive Hanor from that which was done on Shabbos, because we should have avoided the situation in the first place. What did the Chiddush of Rav Moshe and Igros Moshe? Others feel now that, albeit we ought to have arranged ourselves better, but we didn't. So when he came to do the Malacha on Shabbos, he had to have Pekuach Nefesh. Now, it's true that the cholim in the hospital are not really part of our equation, because every hospital has its own generator, and the generator has a backup. They don't need the generating from the regular electric company in Israel, but there are people at home who need all sorts of machinery to keep them alive. However, there's another problem with this heter. And to understand this, we need to understand a little bit how the electricity works in the country. There are different turbines which have different output, different abilities. One which can provide X amount of electricity, and another one which can provide double that amount. And they alternate between one generator and the next generator according to the needs of what is necessary or needed at any particular time. Hence the problem, and this is discussed in a number of the poskim here in Israel. The problem is as follows. We have at 8 o'clock in the evening, Shabbos comes in, there's a huge volume of electricity being used all the way around the country by all sorts of people. For that, we need a huge, big generator. As use slackens off, we come to 11 and 12 o'clock at night, it's not economical to run a huge, big generator with a huge output for the few people who are, for the little bit of electricity that we need at midnight. So what do? We change to the small generator. So we do malachas for the small generator. Now, if the system would be that we run the big generator, cut off the big generator, and then we turn on the small generator. So if we argue on Igros Moshe, until midnight, we had the heter for the big generator because of the cholim sheyesh b'sakana. And after midnight, we needed to put on the small generator. Fair enough. Problem is, it doesn't work this way. If they know that at midnight, they're going to shut down the big generator, what do? At 11 o'clock, they do malachas to start the small generator going. Was there any heter then? No, because we're running at the same time the big generator. That one's running anyway. So the big generator, which has been running since 8 o'clock, is running anyway. Now we do malachas for the small generator at 11 o'clock. Why? Because I have the intention of closing off the big generator at midnight, and then I will need the small generator. This is a big question. Does this create an issa of Maisa Shabbos on the malacha, which was done at 11 o'clock per issa, but after they turn off the big generator at midnight, it becomes necessary, the malacha which I did at 11. Now, the closest that we can find, l'ch'oira, is a Beis Yosef b'Shem Chuvas HaRashba. It's not printed in our regular Chuvas HaRashba, but the Beis Yosef brings a Chuvas HaRashba which says that if the goy did a malacha, he heated up my chocolate for me, and I took it off the fire, and it cools down. Now that it's cooled down, then there's no revach for me in the malacha which the goy did when he heated up my chocolate. Nevertheless, says the Chuvas HaRashba, move over Beis Yosef, since at that time the goy did a malacha with no heter for me, the issa of hana from what the goy did is in place and remains even at a time when I'm not deriving any hana from it anymore. So the Tehillah Ladaven and Shin Yud Ches learns from this Rashba, move over Beis Yosef, that the same applies to a Jew who did a malacha of Ma'aseh Shabbos. which at the time when he did it was also mishum ma'aser Shabbos. Subsequently, a situation arises which at this point in time would be allowed to do this malacha, but since it was done at the time when it was asa, the issa of ma'aser Shabbos is still in place. That's the Tehillah of David, who learned this from the Tshuvas HaRashba. A similar thing is in the Chazon Ish in Sefer. He's not discussing at this point deriving pleasure or hana or benefit from electricity in Eretz Yisrael, but the Chazon Ish also learns this pshat in the Rashba. The emes is that they had the Beis Yosef B'Shem, the psak of the Rashba. They didn't have the tshuva. Today we have Chedusha or Rashba from Iraisa. They got hold of the original Ksav Yad of the Rashba, and they printed it in Chedusha Rashba on Shabbos at the back. Since then, it's been printed in the Tshuvas HaRashba, the new ones, and there it's almost clear in the Rashba that the Rashba says explicitly in the same tshuva that when it comes to Amir al-Akum, we have to be stricter. Hayois, that Amir al-Akum, people view it as being a lenient thing. Therefore, we have to be more machmeh in the hana from a goy than from a yid. Hashem will still see these areas in which we're more makel by goyim. But the Rashba says on this point to be more machmeh by goyim. And therefore, after we've seen the original tshuva of the Rashba, there's a big mokim to say, not like the Tehillah David and not like the Chazon Ish, and be matir mishum pikuach nefesh. That's discussion number one over this Tshuvas HaRashba in the practicalities of the way they generate electricity here in Eretz Yisrael. Now, we move on to the next discussion. And the next discussion is, let us say, like Reb Moshe, that there's no heter of pikuach nefesh because they ought to have arranged things differently. Or we'll learn like the Chazon Ish until David in the Rashba, no heter mishum pikuach nefesh. There's another nidin over here. Are we to treat the malachas done by these Yidden as a mezid or as a shaykh? If it's a shaykh, then firstly it'll be glat mutter after Shabbos. The shaykh you're allowed to have an off from it after Shabbos. And Vilna Gaon says that even on Shabbos as a heter b'shaykh, he argues with the Shulchan Aruch and Meir Rishonim, but the Bir Halacha says b'makom hatzorech you can rely on the Vilna Gaon. Now, when it comes to electricity on Shabbos, maybe the need to use electricity on Shabbos is called a makom tzorech, and maybe b'tziruf with other svaras we could be makel if we could call it a shaykh. What's the question? Unfortunately, we can't really say that these people are Machal Shabbos and they've never heard of Shabbos. Can't say that. They know that there's from Yidden, and they know that there's from Yidden, say in the name of the Torah, that there's an Issa of Chilul Shabbos. They know that. But they've never been taught it in the correct way. How do we define Mezid and Shoigig? Is Mezid and Shoigig in the halachas of Ma'aser Shabbos dependent on whether this person is going to be punished in Gehenna? Is it dependent on whether he needs to bring a korban chatos? How do you define a mezid and shoigig? It's extremely unclear. It's well known that it says in the Rambam that a yid, you're not allowed to hate. Goy, you're allowed to hate a goy. What about hating a yid who's Machal Shabbos? So ostensibly, theoretically, if this fellow is called a Mumel Chalal Shabbos, then you're allowed to hate him. There's no issa to hate him. So Chazon Ish writes in Yerideh that we don't have in today's world a person who you're allowed to hate. Why, says the Chazon Ish? Because he's only called a Mezid, a Machal Shabbos, a Mumah, if he was taught about Shabbos in the correct way. You explained it correctly, in a way that he's able to hear and understand. And nevertheless, he goes and he transgresses, amazing. That's called the Machal Shabbos fast. Says the Chazon Ish, there's no one in today's generation who knows how to say things in a way that they're going to accept and understand. So it's always called a Tinnik Shenishba. That's the Chazon Ish in there, he doesn't discuss the dinim of Maisa Shabbos at all. What about Maisa Shabbos? So this is a very, very sensitive question. Zalman writes in Hilchos Shlomo Chelik Beis. I know he says there's a question about whether the Mechalel Shabbos of today are called the Tinik Shenishba Le'inyan the dinim of Maisa Shabbos, but Loi Ani Libi, I can't make up my mind whether to say that it's mutter because these people are called Anoim Mutter and Tinik Shenishba. I can't go so far. He recognizes two studies, but he can't actually say that it's mutter. HaRav Vosna has a tshuva in Shevet HaLevi, where he writes, but it's hard to know exactly what he means. He says, if this person is Yodea min HaShabbos, then he's amazing and it's forbidden to have a no. Vim eino Yodea, then of course it's mutter. Now our question is, how do you define Yodea, not Yodea? He knows that we say Shabbat Shalom, that's not called Yodea min HaShabbos. So what degree of Yodea constitutes a Yodea in the dinim of Oima Mutter on Shabbos? This is a very sensitive point. No clear achra on this question. We have so far two nidonim. Nidin one, besides Chil Hashem, which is a separate issue, we have nidin number one. In the dinim of Maisa Shabbos, can we be matir because what they're doing is necessary for Pikuach Nefesh? Number two, can we be matir because what they did was done out of ignorance, and perhaps they're called an Mutter, and perhaps an Mutter is then of a Shoigig, and perhaps a Shoigig might even be Mutter on Shabbos itself, according to the Vilna Gaon. Now, there is another thing. There's many people in this country who don't want to be Mekel Alpi either of the two suggested svaras. But there's a third svara to be matir, but doesn't always apply so easily. What's the third? It says in Shulchan Aruch that the goy did a malacha on Shabbos. He lit a candle for me in my house. He lit 50 candles. But if I had anyway burning a candle, and I'm close enough to that candle that I could read by the light of that candle, albeit with difficulty, albeit uncomfortably, but it was possible. Once it was possible, says the Ramah B'Shem Dagos Maimini, the goy added for me another 50 candles, and now I can sit back in my chair and read comfortably and enjoyably. There's no issa in Hano from what the goy did in such a situation. So there's plenty of people, what do? They get themselves a battery, a generator, whatever it might be. And that should put on one light. Once I have a light, the non-from Jew, l'choyre, should have the same heter that whatever malach he did for me on Shabbos is not adding anything to me because I could manage b'diavad anyway. This is the suggestion. What's the problem? Number one, Rav Zalman writes in Hilchos Shlomo. Interestingly, the son of Rav Yosef, in his Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, in his Sefer Yalkut Yosef, Halacha Brura, says the same thing. That you can't learn Hano from a Yid from Hano from a Goy. Why? Because Hano from the Goy is a chashash you might come to tell it. And that says Agos Maimoni that if anyway b'diavad I've had a way of being able to read. So for the difference between being able to read and being able to read comfortably, nobody's going to go and instruct the Goy. So that's why the Agos Maimoni allowed it when there was any way to count. However, when the Yid did a malacha, that's also Mishum Maisa Shabbos, having a no from what was done. Am I having a no? For sure I'm having a no, because I could have read with difficulty, now I'm reading at ease. So it's very unclear that this heta applies bichlal to having a no from what a Yid did on Shabbos. Unless we were going to say that the malacha which the non-from Yid did has the same dinim as a goy doing on Shabbos, and then we'll have this heter. Others argue with Rav Zalman and hold that there will be a heter even by a Yid in a situation where I could anyway have that hano in some form or another. However, there's a tshuva nigras Moshe. Again, he's not discussing in this tshuva about having a no from electricity here in Israel. He's discussing completely different nidden over there, Moshe. Moshe is discussing over there, instructing the goy to do a malacha to turn on my air conditioning on Shabbos. Now, the Shoel suggests, if he didn't turn on my air conditioning, I would sit at home, it would be boiling hot, I could still sit in the house, but it wouldn't be so comfortable. So now I turn on the air conditioning. That should be the same as the goy turning on extra lights. And Moshe says, no, you can't compare. Why, says Moshe? The het of the Gos Maimoni and the Ramah is only when the goy repeats a hana which I have anyway. I have a hana of light, and he gave me additional light. On that Gos Maimoni says that in halacha that's not called having hana. However, says Rav Moshe, the fact that I could sit in my house without air conditioning, sweltering away, but I could sit there, I could eat my meal there. But he's made for me a new hana. What's the new hana? Air conditioning. I didn't have that hana with me. Says Rav Moshe, any new hana, even if you could manage without it, there's no heter, even by a goy. So if the goy turns on my air conditioning, if there will not be a heter of hagel choyle meituratzin, like by turning on my heating, says Rav Moshe, then it'll be also to have hana to sit in my house in the pleasure of the goy turning on my air conditioning. So if this is the case, then the same is going to apply for many of the hanos, which I derive from what the goy did for me on Shabbos, what the Yid did for me on Shabbos. I could manage without. I could manage without the lights, and I could manage without the fridge, and I could manage without the air conditioner, I could manage without all these things. But Rav Moshe says anything which constitutes a new hana doesn't have a heter with the fact that I could have managed without it. There's a very stark raya to Rav Moshe, because that Gos Maimoni himself, who's the Mekoyer of the heter, that when I have a candle and the goy lights another candle, it's mutter. That Gos Maimoni talks about a different situation, in a different place. I need something from a room. I could go in there and fumble, it's pitch black. I could get out the article which I need from the room. And the goy lit for me a candle in that room. And the shoel in that Gos Maimoni wants to be matte, because I could get the article anyway from that room, which is be'emes on the svara of the Gos Maimoni himself, by the second candle. And nevertheless, the Gos Maimoni doesn't allow it. So that's a very stark right, or Rav Moshe is saying, if you lit for me a new candle, the fact that I could have got there without the candle, that's not a heter. So we have, so far, 3 nidonim. Besides Chilul Hashem, we have one svara to be matter because they're doing it in a situation which warrants doing because of Pekuach Nefesh anyway, even though they're not mechavan for it. We have another nidden that Enoch Hanama, they're doing a Chilul Shabbos, but perhaps it's considered to be like an Omer Mutter and a Shoigig and a Tirish and Ishba. And a third one where I have anyway a light or a fan, what do I have a heter? Because the Jew is not being moisef too much. Meir Rabbi said, B'shus kala kol HaKodesh hazeh, I would like to suggest a reason why the Bel Zarov Zechron Levrocha was matir. If I'm right, I'm happy if the Tzvi would agree. And if I'm wrong, Hashem Atov Yechaper Ba'adi. But if the Bel Zarov said, when you grow up, you'll understand, Efsha b'zoicha, Efsha. It goes like this, Rabbi said. There's an issue in the Torah to do malachos on Shabbos. I'm not allowed to switch on the lights. So I'm shooting. There's an issue in the Torah. If I wasn't a mechavan, I know that I walk into this room, the light's going to go on. If it's a suffix, it might go on, might not go on. There's no Hashem mechavan, I have no intention. If it's vadai going to happen, that's called a psikresha. And a psikresha is also forbidden. So if I know if I walk into this room, even though I have no interest in it, I want it, I'm not interested in it, but the light's going to go on, that's called a psikresha. Now, we all agree. What happens if there's a satellite orbiting Earth thousands of miles out, and I know 100% it's built in such a way, I know that as I walk out my front door, a light is going to go on in that satellite and take a picture of me. It's built that way. Will I have an issa of a psik ratio to walk out of my house? And I think we can say everyone agrees that no, there's no issa. Why? The satellite is so far removed from us that psik ratio of things happening on planet Moon or on a satellite, which we have no shaykhs with, we don't relate to it, we don't feel any contact with, there's no issa of a psik ratio. I think that's agreed by everyone. Now, the Belzerov, I'm suggesting, felt that this heter will apply not only to psik ratio, but also to Maisa Shabbos. Belzerov is sitting in Rehov Agrippas in Yerushalayim. He has the light on. He's never been to the generating plant. He doesn't know how you generate electricity. The only thing he knows is that there's a system, and the system works that you plug in electricity and you get a light on Shabbos. Belzerov held that it's so far removed, the usage of electricity, when a person uses his lights, his air conditioning, his cooking, he doesn't relate in any way to the person who's generating his electricity. Now, of course, if you happen to do that, you've done a malacha d'oraisa, wherever it happens. But in the issa of Ma'aseh Shabbos, Belzerov held that it's so far removed and such a complicated system that there's no contact, no connection between the two, and therefore not including the issa of Ma'aseh Shabbos. If I'm right, then this is the pshat in the Tzvi Rov. What did Tzvi Rov learn in the Sefer Meir Nossan, which he didn't know? Meir Nossan was Machadish Dem, a Rashbo, a Beis Yosef, a Mishnah Brura. Tzvi Rov knew Kol HaTorah Kula, and nevertheless he used electricity. So what did he see in the Sefer Meir Nossan that made him change his mind? The answer is, he saw the introduction, and he saw how close it is and how immediate it is, the connection between what's going on in the generating plant and the hanor that I'm having from it. The way the system is built today, for various reasons, they do not store electricity. Al Capone, what they store for emergency purposes, but they don't use it. The electricity in today's world, and definitely here in Eretz Yisrael, is immediate. What they generate at 9 o'clock is used immediately all the way around the country. And the generator at 9:05 is used all the way around the country. They do not use at any given time from previous supplies. Whatever they have supplied, they keep for whatever the reasons, but they do not run the system this way. And Tzvi Rov learned from the Akdam of the Sefer that it's so simple and so immediate, and the connection is so good that we've built a whole arrangement, and the electricity moves immediately through the wires, and realize that we have a very direct relationship with those who are generating the electricity. And perhaps that's the reason that made the Tzvi Rov change his mind, and perhaps that's the reason why he didn't say halachic opinion to the Belzerov, and if the Belzerov holds that there's still no connection between him and those who generate it, then go ahead and use the electricity. If this is true, there could be various ramifications in halacha on practical ramifications, if this is the pshat in the Belzerov. Finishing this sugya, it's not fair to finish without saying what Rav Zalman writes in Minchas Shlomo. In one set of Minchas Shlomo, it's printed at the end of the tshuva about electricity. In another one, for some reason or another, they printed it at the end of Simon Chuzayin, many simonim later. But Rav Zalman writes at the end of his discussion about electricity, and he says, I have a few svaras to be matter, this svara, that svara. And had it not been a sugya of electricity on Shabbos, perhaps I would have been matter. But a sugya as sensitive as electricity on Shabbos, and a sugya which entails Yidden being Mechal Shabbos Fahesya, says Rav Zalman, is a very, very severe discussion, and therefore with Svaras ba'alma is not enough, says Rav Shlomo Zalman, to be matir. So I'm not saying opinion mutter also, but we're learning from Rav Shlomo Zalman, it's not good enough to say a svara and therefore it's mutter. It has to be built and it has to be based in reality and it has to be well founded and well grounded. And then perhaps we have a heter for usage of electricity on Shabbos, perhaps to Izoicha another time to discuss. What we did not manage to discuss is, according to the Dasa Oisrim, am I allowed to arrange for myself my own private generator, which either will or won't work on Shabbos, with a switch that if my generator fails on Shabbos, it will automatically flip onto the electricity provided by the electric company on Shabbos. That's a separate discussion in its own right. We have this to discuss some other time. My good wishes to everyone and kol tov.